the fortune teller who took control of a man's body. Kevin was ready to fight for his marriage, even after Emily confessed to her numerous affairs. But Sara, his best friend, unveiled another horrifying truth. Emily wasn't just lying to him. She had been using him all along. Shattered and filled with rage, Kevin decides that this time, he will be the one to walk away from the game. Can he seek revenge and start a new life? Or will this final betrayal break him completely? It was hard to pinpoint the exact moment when cracks started appearing between Emily and me. Maybe it happened gradually, but I was too busy with work to notice. We had always been a solid team. She with her design projects, and I with my steady job at an insurance company. But recently, everything had changed. Emily started disappearing more often in the evenings, citing urgent deadlines or client meetings. She used to share details about her projects with me, making me feel like a part of her world. Now, our conversations were reduced to mundane exchanges. "How was your day?" I'd ask. "Oh, the usual. Lots of work," she'd reply with an incredibly indifferent tone, only heightening my suspicions. One evening, when she returned home almost at midnight, I noticed a familiar perfume scent, one that definitely didn't belong to me. "What's that?" I tried to ask casually, but it came out too tense. "Kevin, it's probably from someone at the office. We had a meeting in a crowded room." She waved it off, as usual, quickly changing the subject. But that didn't reassure me. It felt like Emily was hiding something, and I couldn't shake those thoughts. The next morning, while she rushed to the car, her phone was left on the kitchen table. I had always considered myself someone who respected privacy, but this time, something pushed me to pick it up. I opened her latest messages and saw a name, Tom. The messages were neutral, but carried a warmth she no longer showed me. My heart skipped a beat. The next day, I decided to act wisely. My patience was running thin, but I knew that rash actions would only complicate things further. I arranged a dinner at home, set the table, opened a bottle of her favorite wine, and made carbonara, her favorite dish. Emily was surprised when she came home. "What's the occasion?" she asked, taking off her coat and hanging it on the chair. "Just thought I'd do something special for us," I answered, trying to stay calm. She sat down at the table and began eating, throwing quick glances at me, as if sensing something was off. We barely spoke, and I waited for the right moment. As dinner came to an end, I filled her glass with wine and looked her directly in the eyes. "Emily, I want to talk about us," I said, and she instantly tensed up. "What do you mean?" she replied, trying to stay calm, but I could see her fingers trembling. "Recently, I feel like you're drifting away from me. And, to be honest, I think I know why." I paused, giving her a chance to speak, but she remained silent. "Who is Tom?" My words hit like a hammer shattering glass. Emily slammed her glass down and her eyes widened. Her face drained of color, and she began searching for answers in haste. "What? What are you talking about?" Her voice trembled. "I know you're seeing him. I've seen your messages, seen you two together at a restaurant." I kept my gaze locked on hers, watching as her mask began to crack. She went silent, lowered her gaze, and started speaking softly, almost whispering. "Kevin, it's not what you think." "Not what I think?" I interrupted, feeling my anger rising. "Then tell me, what is it? Just a friendship? You spend nights with him, send him letters I've never received from you?" Emily hid her face in her hands and began to cry. I don't know how it happened. It started so innocently." Her words only irritated me further. "Innocently? Is betrayal innocent? Do you even realize what you've done?" I stood up from my chair, unable to sit any longer. She didn't respond, only cried, and in that moment, I realized nothing could be fixed. What we had was broken forever. Emily sat in front of me, her face hidden in her hands. Her shoulders shook from crying, but my heart remained cold. I no longer saw the woman I once loved, but a stranger who had betrayed my trust. "You owe me an explanation," I said, lowering my voice to avoid shouting. "Just once, tell me the truth, Emily." She lifted her head. Her face was red and worn out. "Kevin, I don't know what to say. It went too far. This wasn't supposed to happen," she began, but I stopped her. "What do you mean?" wasn't supposed to happen. Did you accidentally end up at a restaurant together? Did you accidentally exchange messages late at night? You're an adult, Emily. You made a choice. She fell silent, as if weighing whether to say more. Finally, after a heavy sigh, she continued. It happened when you started working so much. I felt lonely. Tom. He was there when you were buried in your projects. At first, it was just talking, then coffee, then dinner. I didn't plan for it, but it got out of control. I see, I said coldly. So this is my fault? No, Kevin, I'm not blaming you. It's just, I didn't know how to tell you that something had changed between us. What changed, Emily? The fact that you stopped loving me? Or that you found someone new? She didn't answer, and her silence hurt more than any words could. I realized that, for her, it had all ended long before I began noticing the changes. She had chosen another path, and now I had to decide how to move forward. I want to know everything, I said after a long pause. How long has this been going on? Have you already slept together? Emily lowered her head, her hands trembling again. Yes, she said softly, and it hit me like a punch to the chest. I felt something break inside me. I wanted to scream, to throw something, but I forced myself to remain calm. I had already decided that I wouldn't let her control my emotions anymore. All right, I replied, hiding my pain behind a mask of ice. Now I know the truth. Thank you for your honesty. She looked at me in surprise. What are you going to do now? She asked. I'm going to move on, I said. Without you. The next few days were chaotic. Emily packed her things and moved in with a friend. She said she needed time to think and that she regretted her actions. But that meant nothing to me. Her choice had already been made. I spent my days working and my nights reflecting. Sometimes I would scroll through photos on my phone, recalling the times when we were happy together. But now, those memories felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else's life. One day, I decided to meet up with Travis. He had been my rock through this chaos, and I knew I could count on his support. She's gone, I said as soon as we sat down at a table in the pub. And how are you? He asked. Empty, I admitted, but at the same time, relieved. At least now I know the truth. Travis nodded, thoughtfully sipping his beer. Listen, Kev, I know it feels like the end of the world right now, but you'll get through it. You're stronger than you think. I wanted to believe him, but the bitterness inside me wouldn't let me just yet. A few weeks later, as I was beginning to adjust to life on my own, I unexpectedly ran into Tom. It happened at a grocery store. He was standing at the checkout counter, holding a bottle of wine. Our eyes met, and he froze as if he'd seen a ghost. Kevin, he said, nodding awkwardly, this is unexpected. I said nothing, staring directly into his eyes. I had no words, only anger and disgust. Do you have something to say? I finally asked. Tom hesitated, then sighed. I never wanted this to happen. It's not what I was looking for. Things turned out differently than I planned. Differently? I smirked, but there was no humor in my eyes. You destroyed my marriage. What did you expect? He lowered his gaze. I have no excuses, but I want to say I'm sorry. Sorry? I repeated, barely holding back my frustration. Sorry doesn't fix anything, Tom. I walked past him, leaving him standing there, confused and silent. I didn't need his apologies anymore. I knew I had to build a new life without either of them. My next meeting with Emily was unexpected. She called and asked to talk. I didn't want to, but I felt I needed to hear her out to put a definitive end to everything. We met at a cafe. She looked different, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her before. Kevin, I want you to know that I truly regret everything that happened, she began. I made a terrible mistake, and now you want to undo it all? I asked. I know that's impossible, but I want you to know I never stopped loving you. Even then. I smiled, but my smile was bitter. Love? Is that what you call love? Then we must have very different definitions of the word. She looked away, unsure of what to say. I hope you find happiness, Emily, I said, standing up from my chair. But not with me. I left her sitting at the table, realizing that this chapter of my life was finally over. A few days after my meeting with Emily, I received an unexpected message. It was from a number I didn't recognize, but the text made my heart skip a beat. Hi, Kevin. We have something in common. My name is Sara, and I'm Tom's wife. I think we need to talk. I reread the message several times before I could gather my thoughts. Tom's wife? Why was she reaching out to me now? What did she know? In the end, my curiosity got the better of me, and I replied. When and where? Sara suggested we meet at the park, on a bench near the lake. When I arrived, she was already there. She was an attractive woman with sharp, confident eyes that made it immediately clear she wasn't here for small talk. Are you Kevin? She asked as I approached. Yes, that's me. And you must be Sara? That's right, she said, motioning for me to sit beside her. Thank you for coming. What do you want to tell me? I asked, not hiding my skepticism. Sara took a deep breath and looked at me. I know about my husband's affair with your wife, she said bluntly. I found out a few weeks ago. At first, I couldn't believe it, but now I have all the evidence. Evidence? I raised an eyebrow. Yes, she said, pulling out her phone from her bag and opening a photo. On the screen were the same images I'd seen at the restaurant. Tom and Emily together, smiling, immersed in their own little world that didn't include us. I've seen it with my own eyes, I said, a bit shaken. But why are you coming to me? Because I think we should join forces, Sara replied. Her voice was firm, almost cold. Join forces? For what? To make them face the consequences of their actions. Tom deserves to know what it feels like to be betrayed, and I think your wife does too. I hesitated. There was something both compelling and unsettling about her words. You want revenge? I asked directly. Call it whatever you want, she shrugged. But I'm not going to sit idly by while they destroy our lives. Her proposal stirred mixed feelings in me. I wasn't sure if I wanted to involve myself in even more chaos. But Sara, with her unshakable confidence, had already begun to outline a plan. You can't let this go unanswered, she continued. Otherwise, they'll just move on like nothing ever happened. I sighed, feeling the same anger I tried so hard to suppress begin to rise within me. What exactly are you proposing? Sara smiled. Her eyes sparkled, like a hunter sensing its prey. Let's just say I have a few ideas, she replied. For the next hour, we sat on that bench and discussed the details. As it turned out, Sara was incredibly organized and had a clear plan in mind. She suggested hosting a dinner where both Tom and Emily would end up in the same room with us. Her goal was to shatter their illusion of impunity. This might be risky, I remarked. Risky, but worth it, she replied. I was still consumed by doubts, but something in her determination made me agree. All right, I finally said. Let's do it. Sara squeezed my hand and nodded. The day of reckoning came sooner than I had expected. Sara convinced Tom to come to a restaurant under the guise of a romantic dinner. Meanwhile, I invited Emily, telling her I wanted to discuss our relationship. The restaurant was quiet, with dim lighting and a cozy atmosphere. Sara and I sat at a table, waiting for them to arrive. Are you sure this will work? I asked, nervously glancing at the entrance. Absolutely, she said confidently. Tom arrived first. He looked content, unaware of what was about to unfold. When he saw us, his smile faded. Sara, what are you doing here? He asked, glancing at me with suspicion. Sit down, Tom, Sara said firmly. We need to talk. At that moment, Emily walked in. Her face instantly turned pale when she saw Tom. Kevin? What's going on? She asked, her voice trembling. It means your secrets are no longer secrets, I replied. Sara gestured for them to sit. Slowly, they approached the table, but neither Tom nor Emily could meet our gaze. How long has this been going on? Sara began, addressing Tom. Sara, this isn't what you think, he stammered, but she cut him off sharply. Don't you dare say it's not what I think. I have the evidence, Tom. I know everything. Emily nervously swallowed and looked at me. Kevin, No, Emily, you had your chance to tell the truth. But you chose to lie, I replied. Now we only have one question. What were you planning to do next? The conversation turned into a verbal battlefield, with each of them trying to justify their actions. Tom and Emily looked stunned, their confidence shattered. The tension in the room kept rising until, finally, Sara smiled and stood up. Now that you know we know, figure out how you'll live with this. But I promise you, Tom, you won't walk away from this unscathed, she said, staring directly into his eyes. I stood and looked at Emily. It's over between us. And you know it, I said, turning to leave. Sara followed me out, leaving them behind. That night, for the first time, I felt genuine relief. The days following the dinner felt like a storm. Tom and Emily had stayed behind in the restaurant after we left, but I didn't care anymore. I felt like I had finally taken back control of my life. Sara turned out to be much stronger and sharper than I had imagined. She had planned every detail of this trap, but as it turned out, this was only the beginning. One morning, I woke up to a phone call. It was Sara. "Kevin, we need to meet," she said, her voice tense. "What happened?" I asked, already bracing myself for something serious. "I have news, and you're not going to like it." We met at the same cafe where we had first discussed our plan. Sara looked worried, but her eyes still held their usual determination. "What happened?" I asked, sitting across from her. "I spent a bit more time digging through Tom's phone," she began, pulling a tablet from her bag. "And it seems this wasn't his only affair. Tom has been cheating on me for a while, and not just with your wife." She showed me a series of messages, photos, and even some videos. Everything was saved in an archive. My heart sank again. Tom wasn't just wrecking Emily's life. He was a pathological liar and manipulator. "And that's not all," Sara continued. "In these messages, he talks about Emily, and not in the most flattering way." I leaned in closer to read the text. Tom had written to another woman about Emily, describing her as a convenient option for fun. He didn't love her. He was just using her. It was so obvious that I couldn't understand how she hadn't seen it herself. "She has no idea what she's gotten herself into," I said, shaking my head. "That's why we need to move forward," Sara said. "Tom needs to pay for everything he's done. And if your Emily decides to stay with him, she deserves to know exactly who she's dealing with." "What are you suggesting?" I asked, sensing that this conversation was heading into a new phase. Sara smiled. That same determination I'd seen in the restaurant gleamed in her eyes once more. "I know a lawyer who specializes in cases like this. We can build a case that will ruin Tom, not just personally, but professionally as well." It was risky, but I wasn't willing to back down anymore. Tom and Emily had caused me a pain I would never forget. If Sara was ready to go all the way, so was I. "All right," I said after a brief pause. "Let's do it." The following weeks were spent working with her lawyer. He was a man in his 50s with an impeccable reputation and a razor-sharp mind. He knew exactly how to use the evidence against Tom to inflict maximum damage. This was all new territory for me. I'd never imagined myself getting so deeply involved in something like this, but now I was in it up to my neck. Sara was there every step of the way, and our collaboration grew into something more. She wasn't just an ally anymore. She was someone who truly understood me. One evening, as we wrapped up another meeting with the lawyer, she suggested we go out for dinner. Sitting in a small restaurant, we discussed our plans until she suddenly asked, "Kevin, have you ever thought about what comes next?" "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, when we're done with Tom and Emily, what do you want to do with your life?" I paused to think. Everything had been so intense that I hadn't even considered the future. "I don't know, Sara. I just want to be happy again." She smiled and raised her glass. "To happiness. To new beginnings," I replied, clinking my glass against hers. The day of the trial came sooner than I had anticipated. Sara and I were prepared. Tom and Emily had no idea what was about to hit them. In the courtroom, it was the first time we'd seen them together since that dinner. Emily looked uneasy, while Tom, as always, exuded misplaced confidence. Sara spoke first. She calmly and clearly laid out all the facts, backing her words with evidence. The lawyer executed his part flawlessly, and I could see Tom beginning to unravel. When it was my turn, I held nothing back. I recounted everything I had gone through because of their affair and how it had impacted my life. Emily was crying, but this time her tears didn't stir any pity in me. These were the consequences of her choices. Tom tried to defend himself, but it was too late. His career, reputation, and relationship were left in ruins. After the trial, Sara and I stepped outside. The evening was cool, but I felt an odd sense of calm. "Is it over?" I asked. "This is just the beginning," she replied. We stood on the sidewalk, watching the dark sky illuminated by the city lights. Sara took my hand. "Kevin, you're strong, and you deserve better." "So do you," I replied. That moment marked a turning point for me. I realized that no matter how heavy the past had been, I could still create a new future. And maybe, this time, it would be free of betrayal and pain. Kevin stood on the sidewalk, feeling the city's cold wind against his face. But inside, there was silence, as though something important had been left behind. Sara still held his hand, her calm yet resolute gaze fixed on the future. But in that gaze, there was more than just support. There was an understanding, something Kevin had only just begun to feel. "You did the right thing," she said, not letting go of his hand. "This isn't just a step toward freedom from them. This is your life. You're in control of it." Kevin nodded, feeling her words sink deeper than he'd expected. He understood now that their battle wasn't just about Tom and Emily's betrayal, but about his own choice. The choice to let go of the past and allow himself to move forward. He had done it, but one more moment lingered. The next day, as Kevin arrived at work, he saw her, Emily. She was standing by his desk, her eyes downcast, waiting silently. His heart jolted, but he didn't let it show. "Kevin, we need to talk," she said in the tone he knew all too well, the one she used when she was asking for something important. "I don't think there's anything left for us to talk about," he replied coldly. "Wait, it's not what you think." Her voice trembled as she stepped closer. "You can't just leave it all behind. We've been together for so long, and you can't just forget that." "You're right, Emily," Kevin said, not hiding the pain in his voice. "We've been together for so long, and I remember every minute of it, every moment you lied to me. And no, I'm not going to forget it. That's why we're here." She froze, stunned. Her eyes filled with tears, and she tried to catch his gaze. "Kevin, I'm truly sorry. All those mistakes. I broke us, but I've changed. It wasn't what you think." "Oh? And how do you explain that neither Tom nor the other men cared about your so-called transformation? Are you trying to tell me your love was real?" Kevin couldn't hold back his sarcasm. "What exactly has changed, Emily?" Emily was silent for a moment, looking surprised. Then her expression shifted. She lifted her head as if she had made a decision. "I know I was wrong," she said, trying to gather her strength. "But that doesn't mean I can't change. I want to fix this. You don't understand how much I've lost. You're the only one I truly love." Kevin heard her words, but couldn't respond right away. Her eyes, her expression, there was such desperation in them that it left him breathless. "Emily, I can't just forget," he said, barely believing he was still trying to make sense of the situation. "Everything we had has turned into nothing but pain for me. And your love, it can't fix that. I'll do anything," her voice was firm now, "to earn your trust back, to rebuild our relationship. Everything we had before, I can fix it. Just give me a chance." She stepped closer, and this time, it wasn't manipulation or a plea for mercy. Kevin saw sincerity in her eyes, and though he felt anger, part of his heart still reached for her. But at that moment, Sara appeared. She said nothing, simply watching them. Emily immediately recoiled, as if her conversation with Kevin no longer mattered. "Is this your wife?" Sara asked Kevin, glancing at Emily before turning back to him. "Yes. I heard everything. Don't make a mistake, Kevin. She's trying to manipulate you again." Emily went pale. Her hands trembled, but she didn't look away. "Real change doesn't happen overnight," Sara said calmly. "You respect yourself more than anyone else ever will. And now is your time." Kevin stood in silence, feeling the weight of both women's gazes on him. His heart still ached, but he knew he had a choice now. A choice he didn't have just months ago. "I can't live in lies anymore," he finally said. Looking at Emily, "I'm sorry, but nothing you say will undo what happened between us." Emily lowered her head, her voice barely audible. "You're going to ruin my life." "You already ruined mine," he replied quietly. "I'm letting you go, and I'm not coming back." Sara stepped closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. He felt her support giving him strength. Kevin took a step toward the office door, leaving behind a past that no longer mattered. Though Emily stayed behind, and Sara walked beside him, he knew his real journey was just beginning. Kevin stood on the threshold of his office, feeling the world around him shift. His relationship with Emily was over, yet there was still something unresolved, an uncontrollable part of his life he couldn't release. The next day, Sara came to him with new project ideas, but her expression was serious. "I know what you've been through," she said, sitting across from him, "but you haven't fully closed this chapter yet. Emily still hasn't left you alone, and that's no coincidence." Kevin looked at her, a strange unease stirring in him. He knew she was right. "I still can't understand why she did what she did," he sighed, breaking the silence. "Everything I did for her, and yet she—" "Do you want to know the truth?" Sara asked, meeting his gaze directly. Kevin raised his eyebrows, surprised by her tone. "What do you mean?" "I know what was going on with her. It wasn't just a mistake. It was her choice." Sara paused. "She cheated on you with other men. I don't know exactly how many, but I can see her betrayal became a habit. She's playing games with you and everyone else." Kevin felt the pressure in his chest grow stronger. He didn't want to believe it, but deep down, he already knew it could be true. "How did you find out?" he asked, trying to suppress the wave of disappointment. "I have my sources," Sara replied with cold confidence. "You're not alone. She hasn't just betrayed you, Kevin. She's stolen your trust while you were focused on your work." Kevin lowered his head, unsure of what to say. A vast chasm stood between them, and in that moment, he felt as if his entire life was falling apart. "This can't be true," he said, barely believing his own words. "She's my wife." "And so what?" Sara countered, her gaze unwavering. "You gave her a chance to change. She didn't. You still have the chance to start a new life without her." But just then, his phone buzzed, a notification from an unknown number. Kevin felt his heart race as he opened the message. "I know you've found out the truth. This is only the beginning. If you want to fix everything, meet me. Tonight. Your house." Kevin's body felt heavy with unease. His hand trembled as he typed a response. "Who is this? I know who you are. I know what you fear." He clutched his phone and looked at Sara. Is it her? Is it Emily?" "I don't think so," Sara said with some hesitation. "But it might not just be her. There's something bigger here." Sara could feel the tension in the room mounting and noticed the internal struggle Kevin was grappling with. "You need to find out more," she added, standing up. "Tonight is your chance. Maybe you'll discover who's behind all of this." Kevin found it hard to breathe, but he knew he couldn't leave this unanswered. He decided to go home and figure out what was happening. When he entered his apartment, everything seemed normal, but something was off. She was there, sitting on the couch, dressed in dark clothes, with a cold smile on her face. "I knew you'd come," Emily said, lifting her head as Kevin approached. "How did you know?" he asked, feeling the tension in him rise. "I've always known you wouldn't just leave it like this," she said softly, but her every word was sharp and deliberate. "I've always had a plan, and now you're just a part of it." Kevin asked, "What do you want?" "I want you to understand that my betrayals were only the beginning. You can't go back to what we had before because you've never truly seen the real me. I've been with other men, Kevin. I love them more than you, and there's nothing you can do about it." Kevin stood there, stunned, not knowing what to do. A storm of shock and deep disappointment churned in his chest, flipping his world upside down. "You couldn't be honest with me?" he said, struggling to manage his emotions. "You weren't even honest with yourself." Emily stood up and stepped closer, looking directly into his eyes. "And you weren't honest either. You lived in your fantasies, and that's your weakness, Kevin. You always hoped I'd change, but I didn't. How could you?" Kevin's voice was filled with pain. Emily smiled. "I couldn't, and you'll never understand why." Just then, Sara burst into the room. She hadn't been invited, and her sudden appearance felt like a final move in this game. "You've trapped yourself," Sara said, tossing her hair back. "Now Kevin understands who you really are." But Emily didn't react, her gaze remaining icy and unreadable. "It's too late for that," she whispered, looking at Kevin. Kevin stood there, staring at Emily, who still wore that cold expression. She was silent, but her eyes seemed to speak volumes, as though she understood every unspoken word. "What do you want from me?" His voice was cold, but there was an invisible struggle in his eyes. "I want you to understand," she said, finally taking a step forward. "You were never enough for me, Kevin. You were always in the shadow of my desires, and I found a way to fix that, in my own way. With other men. You never understood that." Emily stepped closer to him, and though Kevin heard her words, he couldn't react immediately. His heart pounded faster, his mind struggling to process it all. Sara stood off to the side, watching them. Her expression was serious, but there was no denying that she, too, was part of this game. Or maybe even its mastermind. "I don't want to be a part of your games anymore," Kevin said, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. "I loved you. I tried. But this no longer makes any sense." "Oh, Kevin." Emily paused, her smile growing colder. "You'll never be able to pull me out of the world I live in. You can't understand what it means to have another life. A life where you're just one of many." She stepped even closer, and Kevin felt her words cut deeper than he could have imagined. "Are you saying I was just a part of your games?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but each word was heavy with pain. Emily smiled again and gently stroked his cheek. "Yes, you're part of this world, but not all of it. I have other men, and I'm not afraid to admit it. And no, Kevin, I won't leave you for them. I don't need you anymore. There's nothing you have that I can't find elsewhere." Kevin recoiled from her, his heart tightening with outrage and heartbreak. "You betrayed me, not just once, but over and over. That hurts. Do you understand that?" "Yes, I do," Emily said quietly. "But you can't stop what's already happened. You can't go back to how things were." Kevin turned to Sara, as though seeking answers in her eyes. "This was your idea, wasn't it?" he asked. "You want me to walk away from this, but now I see we've all been part of your game." Sara was silent for a few moments, her gaze cold and calculating. "I helped you find out the truth," she said, her voice steady but weighted with unspoken emotion. "You were weak and couldn't see it on your own. I gave you a chance to see reality, but you were always fixated on your love for Emily. You couldn't see how deeply she deceived you. You didn't understand that she was never your other half. I had to show you that." Kevin looked at her, his eyes filled with regret and confusion. "You were part of this too? You knew everything?" His words sounded lost, but they carried pain. Sara didn't answer immediately. Step by step, she moved closer to him. "I had my reasons," she said softly. "You were my friend, and I couldn't leave you in the dark. You had to know the truth. You were blind. Now you see that Emily was never your destiny." Kevin looked at her, his gaze full of questions. "You promised me it would be better. But now, everything you've done, it turns out it was all part of your manipulation." Sara didn't stop. She stepped even closer, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Not everything in life can be resolved easily, Kevin. Sometimes, to move forward, you have to leave behind what holds you back." Meanwhile, Emily remained seated on the couch, her eyes fixed on Kevin. She stayed silent, as if waiting for him to make the next move. "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice sounding more distant than before. Kevin looked at her again. Everything was tangled, but he realized this no longer made sense. The connection was broken long ago, and no matter how hard he tried, rebuilding a relationship with the woman who betrayed him was impossible. He quietly walked out of the room without looking back. Sara stayed behind, watching him with a mix of satisfaction and disappointment. She hadn't gotten exactly what she wanted, but she could see Kevin starting to grasp the true nature of the situation. As he left the house, his heart raced. He knew this was the beginning of a new chapter. Now, it was up to him to decide how to face it. Kevin stepped out into the cold, quiet street. Thoughts of Emily, of everything that had happened, replayed in his mind over and over. Everything felt temporary, uncertain, and deeply treacherous. He walked quickly, almost running, his head lowered to his chest, trying to find some piece of himself in all this chaos. But the harder he tried to escape, the more it seemed to chase him. Footsteps behind him. He heard someone catching up. Turning around, he saw Sara approaching him. Her expression was calm, But Kevin felt this wasn't over yet. Do you want to say something? He was tired, but his voice was firm. Sara stepped closer, her expression unreadable. Yes, Kevin. I want you to understand. I didn't just show you the truth. I helped you see yourself, to see who you really are. And even if you want to leave this behind, you'll still carry that pain with you. Kevin sighed. And what do you want from me? To go back and accept that everything between us was just another lesson? Sara didn't respond right away. Her eyes were cold, but that same look, the one she had given him from the very beginning, flashed across her face once more. I want you to know that I wasn't your rival. I was the one who showed you the path where you made your own choice. You, Kevin, always chose Emily. You had the chance to leave it all behind, but you couldn't. He looked away, his heart pounding wildly, as though every word she spoke was a sharp knife. But he couldn't deny it. She was right. I don't know what you're trying to accomplish, Sara. Do you want me to feel guilty for loving her? For trying to make our family happy? Sara stepped closer, her voice growing softer. I want you to understand that her choices are her own. But you stayed in her shadow. Do you want her back? Can't you see that she destroyed you with her own hands? Kevin was shattered. A sense of helplessness engulfed him from head to toe. And yet, he knew he couldn't return to that life. So he simply said, I can't take this anymore. At that moment, he heard the same familiar voice behind him, the one he had been trying to ignore. Kevin, don't go. You know I did everything for us to be together. It was Emily. She stood there, desperately trying to catch up to him. Her eyes were weary but determined. Kevin turned to her, feeling a mix of disappointment and pain. You couldn't choose me, Emily. You chose your other men and I was left here without you. Emily flinched, her voice growing quieter. You don't understand. I couldn't do anything else. My feelings for you changed. I couldn't leave them behind and build my life with someone who didn't see me, who didn't see my aspirations. And Sara was the only one who understood me, who knew what I wanted. You were always in my shadow. Kevin stared at her, his heart racing faster. He felt anger, pain, disappointment. But with every word she spoke, it seemed he lacked the strength to keep fighting. And you think we can go back to that? That we can live together again? He asked, his voice heavy with emotion. Emily took a step closer to him. I don't know, Kevin, but I know that what we had wasn't meaningless. And maybe this isn't the end. Maybe we can find what we lost. Kevin felt lost. He could no longer decide what was right. His heart pulled him toward one woman, but his mind told him it had all been a mistake. Maybe you're right. Maybe we never had anything real to begin with, he replied, his gaze dropping wearily. Sara quietly stepped out of the shadows, looking at them. Her gaze was as cold and unyielding as it had been on the first day. I know you won't let this go, she said, her voice quiet but piercing. You can't decide who to stay with. But you also can't leave what happened without consequences. You need to understand, Kevin. You're part of a world where there are no simple answers. And in that moment, as Kevin looked at the two women standing before him, he realized every choice was hard, and each one left him torn between them again and again. Whether he stayed with his wife or chose a new path with Sara, this was the moment when everything in his life turned into a question without a clear answer. What do you think? Can Kevin forgive his wife after everything that's happened? Or should he leave her behind and start fresh with Sara?